Hi everyone! Welcome to my last summer reading recommendation video. This time I am concentrating on romance books and contemporary books that I think are fantastic for the summertime. If you're interested in seeing summertime reading recommendations for thriller, horror books, or for fantasy books, I will leave both of those videos linked down below. But today we are talking specifically about romance and contemporary, which I think for me feels the most summertime. That is when I'm most in the mood to read romance or contemporary, depending on the type of contemporary that book is. So hopefully this video gives you some new recommendations that maybe you've heard of or maybe you haven't. So let's talk about all those books. The first one I have is Firefly Lane by Kristen Hanna. This follows two main characters who, when they're very young, become absolute best friends. And that's why this book for me feels so much like summertime, because this book really is set during the summer where these two friends become so close. And you're following not only kind of their childhood friendship and experiences, but then you're also following them years later as adults as they transition into a new phase of their life and how their friendship has to change and grow and adapt to their new life situations. And I love Kristen Hanna's writing. I love how real her characters always feel, and she always gets me so emotional when I read her books. I do think that this one might be one of the saddest Kristen Hanna books I've read. It hits so hard at the end, so I will warn you, I don't necessarily know if this is the most feel-good book of this recommendation list, but if you love like a hard-hitting emotional contemporary with such a clear focus on friendship and featuring characters that feel so incredibly well realized, I think that this is a great one. It's just really sad. It's so sad. So I really enjoyed it despite it being really sad. So I have to shout out Kristen Hanna. She's one of my favorite authors for sure. The next book slash author I have to feature is Liane Moriarty, and I picked Big Little Lies to recommend to you for this video, but honestly, Liane Moriarty, any of her books are fantastic beach type reads where you can very easily escape into her stories. She always has kind of these very flawed main characters at the center of her stories, and she always kind of has a mystery element to her stories. So they're not just contemporary novels, they also kind of tie in a little bit of mystery to them. But for me, Big Little Lies is by far my favorite Liane Moriarty. This was the first Liane Moriarty book that I've read, and honestly, since reading this one, none of her other books have come close. I think the closest another book has come is My Husband's Secret and What Alice Forgot. I also love those two, but Big Little Lies was so special, so good. This is mommy drama at its finest. You may already be familiar with Big Little Lies because it's an extremely popular HBO TV show adaptation at this point, but I think, of course, the book is better. I loved the flawed main characters that we're following, and I loved the drama and the mystery and trying to figure it all out. It was so good. It's so juicy. It's so good. So if you want an escape, this is definitely a great one to turn to. Another book slash author I have to feature is Emily Henry. The book I'm holding up is Beach Read because this is my favorite by Emily Henry so far. I've also read People We Meet on Vacation. I was not a huge fan of that one, but Beach Read, I mean, it says it in the title. I feel like I can't do a summertime reading recommendations if I don't feature Beach Read. So Beach Read is a little bit misleading because it does not take place on a beach. You're following two main characters who are each authors, and basically one of them writes romance, one of them writes, I think, like mystery, crime thrillers, and so they decide to swap genres and try to write what the other one writes. And through this experiment, obviously they have maybe a romance, maybe. So beach read for me, I loved it. I thought it was not only just like a great romance, but it also dealt with a little bit of heavier topics as well that I think were really well done. I really liked the main characters. I liked their chemistry. I really liked Beach Read. I have not really read any of Emily Henry's newest, but I feel like all of her books are great summertime reading recommendations, and I definitely want to check out her other books that have come out, Book Lovers, Happy Place. They're great for the summertime. So if you're looking for a beach read, here you go. Just take this one. And sorry, the guy writes literary fiction, not crime thriller fiction. My bad. Right, and the next book I have is The Unhoneymooners by Christina Lauren. This is also one that's extremely popular, extremely hyped, so I don't feel like I have to say too much. It is such a fun enemies to lovers book. It screams summer just from the cover alone. You're following two main characters, one of which is one of the bridesmaids to this wedding, and the other one is the best man in this wedding, and the entire wedding party gets super sick from the wedding buffet except for these two main characters who did not partake in the buffet. And so to avoid wasting the money on this honeymoon that the bride and groom had booked, they suggest that these two people take their honeymoon and go on the trip instead, since they are not sick. And so ensues an enemies to lovers romance because those two main characters who did not get sick really don't like each other. And it is so much fun. It is so tropical, and you're honeymooning in Hawaii. I feel like I need to say no more. This is the perfect summer romance read. The next one I have is Fix Her Up by Tessa Bailey. I think that this one has really mixed reviews, and I personally love this book. It is one of my absolute favorites. I actually read this on my honeymoon several years ago, so I think that this is a fantastic summertime beach read because I read it on the beach and had so much fun with it. So good. So you're following a main character who is from a small town, and she has an older brother, and one of her older brother's friends is this famous Major League Baseball player, but he gets injured, and so he has to retire from Major League Baseball, and so he moves home, and he's very depressed because he can't play baseball anymore. And the girl in our story, the main heroine, she had always had a crush on her older brother's friend. So now that he's back in town, she's kind of like interested again. And I love our main heroine character. She actually is a like a birthday party like performer. So she's a clown. She's a clown at birthday parties, and she's the best. I love her character so much, and the chemistry between the two main characters and their banter and the build up, and it was just perfect for me. I love Fix Her Up. So if you're looking to just get swept away by some fun character banter and some steamier scenes, this is a great one to turn to. I love this. I love it. It's one of my favorite romance books. So I don't know why it has so many mixed reviews. If you don't like it, I'm so sorry, but this is one of my favorite. I love it so much, mainly because of the main girl character. She was just fantastic. The next several books I have are actually more contemporary rather than romance. I'll kind of feature what I think are the most mix, like hybrid between contemporary and romance. So the first one I have is The Unsinkable Greta James by Jennifer E. Smith. The reason I think that this is a great summertime read is because your main character, Greta James, she is a famous musician, and very recently her mother passed away, and her mother and father had booked this Alaskan cruise together. So now that her mother is gone, she decides to go on the Alaskan cruise with her father to try to kind of help with like the grieving process of losing her mom, but also to kind of connect with her father once again because they've been a little bit estranged in recent years. So Greta James, I just loved her as the main character, and the Alaskan cruise setting was so much fun. So I think that this is such a good summertime one if you're looking for that type of vacation vibe. The reason I'm putting this under more contemporary rather than romance, even though there is a romance subplot, for me, that's not what I loved about this book. I loved Greta James exploring kind of herself and learning how to grieve, learning how to build this relationship again with her family, and just kind of prioritizing herself for the first time and doing a lot of that self-reflecting. That was kind of my favorite part of the book. So if that's something that you really are interested in reading about or you think sounds good, then I highly recommend this one. The romance for me was nothing to write home about. It was kind of just there. So I really enjoyed The Unsinkable Greta James. I think it's a great one to turn to if you are looking for more of a contemporary with a little bit of romance thrown in there. And the next one I have is kind of similar to Greta James in certain ways. It's Evie Drake Starts Over by Linda Holmes. So this one is set in Maine, and you're following a character who is recently widowed. She's very, very much still in the grieving process, and she's having a really hard time kind of coming out of it. And then this man kind of walks into her life, moves to this town. It's a very small town, and that kind of instigates a journey for Evie of starting over, of getting out again and finding happiness once again. And again, I think that this one, it has a romance, it's there, but it's not kind of the primary focus or the primary theme of the story. It's much more about Evie finding happiness within herself first, and then that romance kind of being there once she's found that. And so I really loved, again, exploring that kind of like self-discovery, kind of finding your own happiness with Evie Drake as she embarks on this new phase of her life. So I thought that this was really, really well written, really well done. It had a lot of humor to it that kind of lightened up the more serious subject matter at times. So I think that this is a really great one for the summertime. And the small town Maine setting was just really fun to explore. So I loved this book so much. I would highly recommend it. And then all the rest I have are contemporaries. So we'll start with The Girl with the Louding Voice by Abby DeRay. This is one of my favorite books of all time. You're following a main character who lives in Nigeria, and all she wants in life is an education. And she is born to this situation that makes it extremely difficult for her to get out of this life and go find that education for herself. So you're very much following this character through multiple years of her life as she goes through very, very tough times, very hard situations, and eventually perseveres to find what she's always wanted to find, essentially. It's a beautiful story. It's beautifully written. I loved exploring the culture in this book. It was something so different that I had never read about before, and it's what a lot of women in Nigeria go through. So it was just really eye-opening, really powerful, and you just fall in love with the main character right away. You're just rooting for her every step of the way. I loved her, so I highly recommend this one. I think it's fantastic for summertime, but it's also just fantastic for any time of the year. It's a gorgeously written story. The next one I have is I'll Give You the Sun by Jandy Nelson. This is the only young adult contemporary on this list, and I am not a huge young adult contemporary fan. I don't read a whole lot of them, but for some reason I had picked this one up years ago, and I loved it so much. Jandy Nelson's writing is one of my favorite things ever. You are following two twins in this story who could not be more different from each other, and they each kind of have their own paths and are very much like separate on their own, but you're also following them as they try to connect with each other once again and get close once again, and each of their paths are just so interesting, and the book itself is written in this extremely artistic way. I just really can't describe like why this book worked so well for me. I just loved the writing. I loved the author's voice, and the two main characters are just to die for. I love them so much. They're some of my favorites. This is also a fantastic one to read for Pride Month if you're looking for a good book to pick up in June. So I highly recommend this one. It is gorgeously written, gorgeously told. I just love these twins so much. So highly recommend I'll Give You the Sun. The next one I have is Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I mean, this cover screams summertime. You're following a group of main characters who are all siblings, and their father is a famous musician. And he is not the best, he's not the most present father. And so you're kind of following two separate timelines. You're following a timeline where the mother and the father of these kids meet for the first time, and their kind of like love story and how they fall in love. But then you're also following in the future, years later, these kids now grown up, being estranged from their father and their relationships with each other. So for me, Taylor Jenkins Reid writes unbelievably well-realized characters. Every time I pick up one of her books, I feel like I should be able to Google the character and for them to be a real person, because they're so well fleshed out, they're so well written, and each character in this book, there's quite a big cast of characters, each of them feel so distinct from one another. I just think her character work is unparalleled. It's gorgeous, and even the characters that I hate, I still can't stop reading about because I just have to know. So I love this one. It's a great one for the summertime because they all live in Malibu and you have California as the backdrop. Then last but certainly not least, because it's one of, again, my all-time favorite books, and it is Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi. Again, another unbelievably powerful book where you're following two characters at the very beginning that are sisters, and they are born in Ghana. One of the sisters ends up becoming a slave and gets shipped to America, and the other sister ends up being married off to this Englishman, this very wealthy Englishman. And you're following not only those two characters, those two sisters, you kind of have these snippets of stories at different points in time, because you're following kind of this family tree of these two sisters, and the exploration of ancestry in this book, of exploring like race relations in all of these different time periods. It was so well done. I had never read anything like it, and even though you're only getting kind of these small snippets from each of these characters that you get introduced to, you become so invested in their story every single time. Like every time we would switch to a new time and a new cast, I was like, oh no, but I want those old characters. I loved them. I would find myself immediately entranced by the next cast of characters and the next story that we were exploring. So I just think that this book, the way it's told, the way it's structured, is so beautifully done and makes it such a powerful read. And the ending is so perfect for what the story is. So I can't recommend this book enough. So those are all of the summertime romance and contemporary books I have to recommend to you today. What is one book that you think is a perfect summertime romance or contemporary? Leave those comments down below. Thank you all so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you'd like to, and if you want more information about my Patreon, I will link all of that information in the description box down below. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I will see you all in my next one. Bye!